Blog Talk Radio.
I want you to think of your mind as a computer. You've all heard the lifeboat story, right? You know, there's 10 people in the lifeboat only holds 9. Who are we going to throw out of the lifeboat? And if I told you that story, all of your mind would start thinking, who am I going to throw out of the lifeboat? Because that's how all of our minds work. There's the box and there's where we go. Who are you going to throw out of the lifeboat? If I had said to you, come up with a solution to save everybody, you would have thrown a rope out the back of the boat. You would have turned the boat upside down in the water because it's more buoyant, put the baby on the top of the boat, everybody cling to the boat, no problem. Throw out everything not necessary in the boat. We bail for so many hours. I've heard hundreds of suggestions. If I had said to you, save everybody in the boat. But I didn't say that. I said, who are you going to throw out of the lifeboat? And so your mind went right over here. Just like a salesman says, do you want it on your Visa or your MasterCard? He gave you a choice, didn't he? Is no one of the choices? Never. It's the same technique that salesmen use all the time. Would you like a red card or a blue card? You want that in 10 days or 30 days? You always get a choice, but I control the universe of choices. If I control the universe of choices, I can mold someone's behavior. And they always think that they thought it up by themselves because they didn't realize that I controlled the box. And it's a very valid way of changing a behavior. The whole issue here is who owns the children. The more time you spend with the kids, the more control you have over the kids. It's about control. That's really what, when you boil it all down, that's what we come down to, is who controls the children of the next generation, the next generation, the next generation, the next generation, the next generation.
Hello and welcome to this edition of TZM Global Radio. I'm your host for today, James Phillips, or Jim Phillips, from TZM Education and the UK Zeitgeist Movement chapter. The introduction to today's show were some excerpts from a very good lecture I saw this week, given by Peg Luksic, a Conservative and Constitution Party politician, educational activist, and public speaker. The talk is entitled Who Controls Our Children, but if you type in Peg Luksic into YouTube, it will probably come up top. That's spelt P-E-G, new word, L-U-K-S-I-K. It really goes into the detail of the sort of layers of bureaucracy that are implemented by the state into its schools and then back again to a sort of checking process to make sure that people come out of school thinking in a particular type of way, feeling certain things, and essentially if you don't meet the benchmark of their criteria, then you face the academic wilderness where you won't be able to get your foot in the door at a job interview because you'll need qualifications, etc., etc. It really, really does put the meat on the bones of what I went through in my History of Coercive Education lecture in Canada, Z-Day 2012. Also, the work of John Taylor Gatto is very good on this as well. So that's all worth checking out. I think the overarching point being made actually in that introduction can be extended to many other areas of politics, business, and especially the media and education. Such a good story portrayed in that lifeboat example in the intro of either-or thinking. And they can really be used to control people, because if you say to someone, right, I can either punch you in the face or kick you in the knee, some people will actually say, oh, I suppose the knee will hurt less, I'll go for the knee. It's like, no, the answer is neither. I do this with kids all the time, and actually surprisingly, well, not surprisingly as the case may be, they very often don't actually come up with the answer of, well, neither. Which is just, it's not their fault, it's just indicative of children apparently not questioning those in authority, respecting their elders, because they did such a good job marshalling this planet. Well done. Yeah, we'll listen to you talk about sustainability. It's like listening to a fox talk about chickens' rights. Anyway, away from that initial rant and on with the rest of the show. What have I got lined up for you today? Well, I would usually be reading the next chapter of The First Civilization, but unfortunately I won't be doing that for you on this particular show because the author, Jask Archer, is just making some amendments to the text, and he'd like me to just hold off on the next chapter until he's just made some of those amendments. So as soon as they're done and I've got a copy of the PDF, the revised PDF that is, I will carry on with the book from the next chapter. My intention, of course, is still to make an audio book for this. And just throwing a little shout out there for anybody who might be interested, I think eventually we will be looking for someone to piece together some slides for that audio book. But we've got a long way to go before we're anywhere near that. But if you do want to get in touch in the meantime about that project, by all means feel free. My contact information is available through the TZM Education website, which is www.tzmeducation.org. Just go to the contact section and you'll come through to me. The mammoth update for TZM Education is still underway, and I figure that other than sort of essential updates, this might be the last one that needs to be made to really sum up the overarching problems we have with education and how we're going to bridge out of them. I've got several new articles for it, lots of new videos, loads of new stuff, and I intend on sort of going through a lot of it in lecture format through the shows as well. And I may even also make some slide presentations out of that for YouTube as well. So I'm going to be a busy boy. The other reason behind this is because I myself want to restructure my life so that I actually make going into schools to talk to kids about this train of thought my job. Not very easy to do, because essentially we're talking about getting rid of money. Doesn't always work very well when you try and put that in front of people who you want funding from. So this is my next crazy idea, to basically get something together with a few other of the movement members here in the UK, where we're actually going into schools on a regular basis to talk about what sustainability actually means, what it would actually mean for society, and what we're going to have to do if we're truly serious about it. That would be the tagline. Wouldn't be under the Zeitgeist Movement banner. It's more to get into schools on that regular basis, because the reality of my life is that 4 days of my week is spent teaching the drums in school, and I can't possibly move that around to go into schools the amount that I need to. My hope with TZM Education is that those who aren't going to restructure their lives the way I am, which is probably everyone, at least you can go into one school in your local area. I'm just one person. You know, I can't cover every school in the London area, let alone the UK. So for us to go in and talk to kids about this, kids whose minds are more open and willing to understand this extraordinarily simple train of thought, the quicker this transition we all want is going to happen. And in fact, when this update is done, I'm going to hopefully have a much more comprehensive and tight activism package for movement members to be able to access on the TZM Education website in order to go into schools. Because we have to start thinking seriously as a movement and as individual chapters as to who is going to go into schools to spread this train of thought to the younger generations. I haven't had anybody from the movement come forward and say that this is not a very good approach or it's not a very wise one. All of the events I've done have been well received. I've been invited back to all of them at all of the schools. A lot of the kids have had a very, very positive response, and to be honest, even if none of that were true, these are the people who are coming out into the world, about to enter this system, and they are a captive audience. You're talking about 200 or 300 new people hearing this at any one time. The town hall events that we're doing are great, please don't get me wrong, and if you can get new faces there to listen to you talk about this train of thought, then great. But if you're preaching to the choir, so to speak, in other words, talking to the regular faces you see on the stalls week in, week out, then quite frankly, it's actually probably pointless, which is not really in the spirit of efficiency now, is it, boys and girls? So if we're really giving this some thought, then universities, higher school education like A-levels, and even the younger age groups in terms of thinking exercises like the planet Earth concept that's been talked about on this program and in Peter's lectures before is a good thing to do for the younger age groups. There are a whole multitude of things basically that you can do to go into schools to talk to kids about this message. It seems to me like the best place for us to start as a movement, and all you need is someone who's got a reasonable rapport with kids. Maybe they even work in the educational sector or something in your chapter, to basically pick up the mantle, find out where the local schools are, read through some of the activism stuff on the TZM Education website for a bit of a feel of how to go about doing it, and just book a couple of schools, even if it's just a couple of schools in each sort of chapter. Then that would be a really good start, something to aim for. I've got these files already ready to go. I just haven't put them on the website yet. So if you want to get started straight away, by all means get started straight away. Once again, you can get in contact with me through the TZM Education website. So please feel free to get in touch, and I'll help get you on the road to getting this message out to the young people who deserve a better world than the one we've given them. The other project that I've got on the go is the First Christmas. I've detailed this in the last couple of my radio addresses, but just very briefly, the idea is to have an image of a charity or a golden sea with a Christmas hat on top of it, badge design that you stick next to your main profile picture on Facebook to indicate that this Christmas you'd rather friends and family spend the money they would have spent on you at Christmas on someone who actually needs it. So giving it away to charity on your behalf, basically. The idea is to start a gift economy type mentality out there and move away from the whole notion that your social standing with friends and family should be measured by how many presents you get and how much money got spent on you at Christmas. So where I am with regards to this is I've got the design, that's done. The next phase is actually getting the badge on Facebook as a page, or however it needs to be done so that it can be applied to a Facebook profile. Maybe then I can do a little blurb for it, and we just get the page up and running in the background, but more ready to sort of launch on a particular day so that we sort of flood Facebook on one day. And I think in reality, if the project's going to be taken seriously, then we also need a very, very simple website with just the blurb about what it's all about and perhaps a link to the movement. So it could work two ways. It could be good advertisement for the Zeitgeist Movement and also a great way of actually changing the culture. So, your help on it would be really appreciated, guys. Just in case it sounds like it won't make a serious dent, think about how Rage Against the Machine in the UK beat the X Factor to Christmas #1. That just started from a fan starting up a Facebook profile page that just said Rage Against the Machine for Christmas #1. I've had enough of X Factor winning every year. It's about time real music made a fight back. And Rage Against the Machine did actually go to #1, and they donated all of the proceedings from the sales of those tracks bought to a homeless charity shelter. So all in all, that was actually quite a good Christmas, and it worked. So there's no reason why this can't work just as well. So if there's anybody out there who can help me with this next phase of the project, I would really appreciate it. Please do get in touch ASAP. Time is ticking on. It would be great to have this all sewn up and in the bag ready to launch, maybe beginning of November time. So, on with the content of the show. Following on from the last chapter I read in the First Civilization regarding human behaviour, I thought it would be a good juncture here to include a lecture given on Z-Day 2012 in Canada by Matt Berkowitz of the Vancouver chapter, entitled Updating Human Values. It goes through some very challenging issues such as free will and the whole premise of competition in all its forms. I think that it's very, very useful material, I especially like the stuff about free will. free will is really the basis of the prison system, how we feel people act. It's ingrained into much of our cultural assumptions about human beings and why they behave the way they do. If it were to be found that actually we are not agents of free will, but rather reinforced into all of our decisions one way or another through a combination effect of our genes interacting with our environmental stimulus, then that would change the perspective of our culture quite significantly, I feel. So I feel this lecture has a lot of important information in it that is well worth having a listen to. And later on, I'll also be including one of my prepared lectures entitled Releasing Human Potential, subheading Creating a Passion-Led Learning Environment. But first of all, here is Matt Berkowitz's presentation given at Z-Day 2012, Canada, entitled Updating Human Values.
So, I want to discuss some issues seldom discussed in the Zeitgeist Movement. These being certain sociological and psychological elements that directly relate to the value system inherent in a resource-based economy. The overarching theme involves examining what would comprise a relevant or sustainable value system. Along the way, I'm going to be focusing on different psychosocial myths, such as our society's ideas about competition, human nature, and free will. We need to understand that a society's integrity is only as good as the values that support it, and in an inherently unsustainable economic system, we're going to witness a corresponding set of unsustainable values. So, in examining this issue, we must first ask how we would determine whether a particular value system is sustainable. By sustainable, I mean the system can be preserved for the benefit of all the world's people. And by value, I mean simply a principle of preference. So like any scientific hypothesis, we must put it to test. Does the value actually constructively contribute to society as a whole, or is it holding us back? For example, our overconsumptive society values the constant acceleration of consumption of the Earth's resources. Now, it doesn't take a genius to see the invalidity of this. The world of imbalance is the result of such a value, amongst others. It is likewise unsustainable for everyone to want a 40-bedroom mansion, as this would be a tremendous waste of resources and is really a violent disposition due to the depriving effect it has on others. In the market system, people think this represents freedom. It's not. It's irresponsibility in regard to the intelligent management of the Earth's resources, which is what is needed to have a sustainable society. The dominant economic value of the capitalist market system, whatever you want to call it, is essentially any activity that promotes the turning of money into more money for private money possessors. This value masquerades as freedom, as semantically empty or loaded this term may be. And any proposition that obstructs this money sequence process is denounced as blasphemy in our current socio-economic system. Religious institutions similarly preach inherently unsustainable and irrelevant values as they ignore environmental feedback in favor of faith-based, metaphysically oriented beliefs that are void of any critical thought or scientific inquiry. Simply put, if there's no environmental feedback that corresponds with the particular value or viewpoint, what is the point of holding a belief as such? In other words, as Aaron mentioned, there needs to be a physical referent that can be backed up for all of our claims, and this includes, again, as Aaron mentioned, the language we use. So this leads me to a topic that might seem unorthodox to start with, but I think it's logical to do so for the purpose of clarity, and that is semantics, meaning the study of language and communication. I felt it important to prelude this presentation with a look at our language and the issues it can pose on effective communication. First thing I will mention, as Aaron mentioned again, is the need for a physical referent to back up all of our language. The languages we used to communicate with were developed hundreds of years ago and are subject to interpretation. Perhaps nowhere is this clearer than in the Bible, with more than 34,000 offshoots of Christianity. The study of semantics is not something the majority of us pay attention to. As Jacques Fresco says, we talk at each other, not to each other, meaning we assume others understand the words we use in the same way we mean them. When someone claims to be a spiritual person, does that mean that he or she invites the homeless into his or her house for food and shelter? Or perhaps that they attend sanctuary once a week to engage in prayer? In our everyday discussion, we often tend to disagree over the word rather than the intended concepts themselves. We have no shortage of loaded and vague terminology in the English language: freedom, democracy, individuality, and countless others. In an ideal language, our words would be subject to strict definition. As Alfred Korzybski explained, if we wish to understand the world and ourselves, it follows that we should use a language whose structure corresponds to physical structure. And we already have a language as such: science. When an American engineer designs the blueprints for an automobile and sends it to Japan, the same product is turned out. When a doctor writes a prescription, it is not subject to interpretation. Science is the closest approximation we have to reality that we have developed, and as such, it would be invaluable to adopt a more scientific use of our language. With this in mind, I want to move into one of the most widespread and colossally detrimental myths that is dominant worldwide: our beliefs about human nature. There are essentially two human nature myths that I've come across. The first is that certain differences amongst particular groups of humans are innate, and this has given rise to much bad science in the fields of evolutionary biology and genetics, promoting sexist and racist practices. And the second is that particular characteristics are an inevitable part of being human. I do think most people are sincere about their assertion that humans have a fixed human nature. If we examine the historical record of the human species, we find an endless series of wars, power abuses, and corruptions. Since we've recognized the pattern in history, it's very simple to assume that it's somehow instinctual or part of human nature to behave in historically recurring patterns. More specifically, it is common for people to attribute human behavior to their genetic configuration. That is, we are slaves to our genes, which predispose us and predetermine us to an inescapable set of behavioral, psychological, and mental characteristics. Human nature really, though, cannot be generalized as a set of fixed, pre-programmed set of behavioral and psychological characteristics that all people share, irrespective of the environment. As Dr. Gabor Mate says in the first part of Zeitgeist Moving Forward, the only way we can accurately and meaningfully speak of human nature is by looking at our basic human needs. On the one hand, if our basic human needs are met, meaning the bare necessities of food, water, shelter, clothing, to the psychological support, which is really no less important, we can more so expect human beings to develop into caring, compassionate, and socially aware individuals. But on the other hand, if these basic human needs are not met, which is the overwhelming majority of cases within our present society, we get a different set of characteristics that matches this environment: greed, violence, insecurity, and countless other psychological distortions. Also, the word instinct really is an empty idea, and this word essentially needs to be eliminated from our vocabulary and understanding about human behavior. People use the word when they cannot account for the source of a behavior or biological response. The word instinct masks this ignorance, exactly the same way in which free will is used to mask ignorance about the choices we make or the sources of them, and in which God is used to explain a lack of knowledge with how the universe operates, broadly speaking. Rather than using these words, our disposition should be to find the mechanism that's actually responsible for the behavior. Physiologist Jacques Loeb condemned the use of the word instinct back in the early 20th century when conducting research on animal and plant tropisms, meaning biological responses to environmental stimuli. I will get back to this point later. And James Gilligan, in his book Violence, likewise condemns the word, explaining similarly that it's a cop-out excuse to explain behavior. Now, the first part of Zeitgeist Moving Forward addresses this thoroughly, and we're showing parts of it tomorrow. So I will focus on a few sources not discussed in the film. Dr. Robert Sapolsky, who's featured in the film, wrote a book called The Trouble with Testosterone, in which he documented the essentially negligible effect that hormones have between the wide spectrum of behavioral responses that human beings elicit, including passivity versus aggression, irrational emotion versus logic, and so forth. So we cannot explain, for example, the differences between the sexes by hormonal balances. Rather, we have genes that produce proteins which can be switched on or off by triggers from the environment. In other words, neurochemicals in the brain do not instruct us how to behave. They set propensities which must be triggered by the environment. Sapolsky uses numerous case studies, including studies with baboon troops. There is an incident among a troop he studied where the alpha males in a competitively oriented troop were killed off. The result was that within a few months, the competitive tendencies in the troop died off, And whenever new baboons were introduced to this troop, it took about 6 months to learn that competition was not a viable method of interaction. This simply reaffirms that it is the environmental conditions that produce behavioral tendencies like competition, which I'll go more into later. In a fascinating lecture that examines the roles of genes and environment on our behavior, biologist Dr. Bruce Lipton explores the newest available evidence on this classic nature-nurture debate. Since the 1950s, the view of biological determinism that genes control our behavior and emotions has maintained dominance in many scientific circles. What this has led to is a feeling of powerlessness and lack of responsibility for changing ourselves. If you're a victim of your genes, why even bother to try to change yourself? It's inevitable, right? Then came the Human Genome Project, which ran from 1990 to 2000 in an attempt to determine the DNA responsible for the complexity of human functionality. The original presumptions about genes serving as a blueprint for our behavior resulted in the estimate that there is one gene for every protein in our body. And at the same time, or at the time, the estimate was 100,000 proteins. So that means 100,000 genes. And then there's regulatory DNA that controls other genes estimated at a minimum of 40,000. So that's 140,000 genes. In 2001, the results were released, showing there were only 34,000 genes, only about 25% of the original estimate, which means the remaining genes that were expected to be found do not even exist. Biologist and Nobel laureate in physiology David Baltimore reflected on the implications of this finding. Unless the human genome contains a lot of genes that are opaque to our computers, it is clear we do not gain our undoubted complexity over worms and plants by using many more genes. So, with all this research, we should ask ourselves, why do these superstitious beliefs about human nature persist? To address this, we should ask another question. Who benefits? That is, who in society would want to perpetuate this dogmatic belief that humans are innately any such way? Human nature arguments are used as a way to silence dissent of the status quo. Any such criticism of the established way of doing things in society is rendered immediately invalid because it supposedly has been legislated by nature. It's just the way it is, and we can't do a thing to change it. This brings me to one of the most powerful myths of Western culture. Our values revolving around the topic of competition. Stemming from ignorance about human behavior, many people assume competition to somehow be an unavoidable, inescapable part of human nature. The implications of this claim are that no matter what environment we're raised in, it's somehow immutably programmed into us to compete. Let's suppose for a second that this is true. If competition were somehow an innate human trait, why on earth would we be spending so much time raising and training people to behave this way? You would think that there would be no need to do so if it were somehow genetically or otherwise imprinted in us from birth. Of course, no evidence is ever cited to support this, only conjecture and uneducated speculation. For example, people often twist and pervert the process of natural selection into the idea of survival of the fittest, which is wrongly assumed as a Darwinian notion. The phrase survival of the fittest was later coined by a right-wing political theorist named Herbert Spencer, who tried to corrupt Darwin's thinking to his own predefined political views. Darwin spoke about natural selection, which simply means the organism or species that can best adapt to a changing environment will be more likely to survive and reproduce. However, that doesn't actually specify competition as a mechanism. On the contrary, often the avoidance of competition or the deliberate intention to pursue cooperative strategies increases the chance that an organism or species survives. On the flip side, mountains of evidence can be uncovered that refutes our society's myths about competition, that competition is inevitable, that it's more productive than cooperation, that it's more enjoyable, and that it builds character. Likely the best book I've found on the subject was written in the late 1980s by sociologist Alfie Kohn, who wrote a book called No Contest, The Case Against Competition. I really cannot recommend this book enough. Easily one of the best I've read, and I would say mandatory reading for those interested in the Zeitgeist Movement. The author's research that reveals the social cancer that is competition is invaluable, and I want to address some of the most important research described in this book and its social implications, relating it back to the idea of sustainable values. The back cover reads, of the book, contrary to the myths with which we have been raised, Kohn shows that competition is not an inevitable part of human nature. It does not motivate us to do our best. In fact, the reason our workplaces and schools are in trouble is that they value competitiveness. Rather than building character, competition sabotages self-esteem and ruins relationships. It even warps recreation by turning the playing field into a battlefield. No contest makes a powerful case that healthy competition is really a contradiction in terms. And because any win-lose arrangement is undesirable, we will have to restructure our institutions for the benefit of ourselves, our children, and our society. The first myth about competition being a part of human nature is usually asserted by those who have not bothered to understand the environmental conditions that may be responsible for this competitive behavior. And of course, as is nothing new to those in the movement, competition is imposed upon us in nearly every aspect of life, it seems. From the need to compete against our fellow classmates in schools for grades is essentially inevitable in the labor force, for the need to compete for jobs, to the playing field, to corporations having to compete with one another for market share, to governments battling one another for economic dominance. All of it is provably destructive in one way or another, and this multitude of influences can help explain why competition is so deeply ingrained within our culture and why it may seem like it's an inescapable part of human nature to compete. What is not usually considered is that human beings have lived in periods of great scarcity for thousands of years, reinforcing this competitive drive of society. This is essentially inevitable in a scarcity-oriented environment. The same reasoning can be applied, for example, to a pack of lions, which must fight amongst themselves for the limited amount of food in their environment, not because of some immutable genetic configuration. So, logically speaking, if scarcity was eradicated, as is possible in a resource-based economy, to provide access to goods and services without a price tag, we should expect a different set of behaviors and values that correspond to this environment, one that is free of competition and all other monetary-related symptoms, and instead allows large-scale cooperation. Sociologist Phillips offers an interesting insight. He says, "Scarcity is spurious. It now exists only for the purpose of maintaining the system that depends upon it, and its artificiality becomes more palpable each day." To quote another, anthropologist, Marshall Sahlins, "The market-industrial system institutes scarcity in a manner completely unparalleled and to a degree nowhere else approximated, where production and distribution are arranged through the behavior of prices, and all livelihoods depend upon getting and spending. Insufficiency of material becomes the explicit, calculable starting point of all economic activity." By the end of the No Contest book, Cohn has presented hundreds of scientific studies to debunk all of these age-old myths surrounding competition. The following are some examples. One research study involves taking a group of people and instructing them to perform a task. Half of them are told, see if you can figure this task out. The other half are told, this is a contest with a prize awarded to whomever wins and does the job better or faster. Study after study after study across gender, ages, culture find that the people who compete do an inferior job. Another group of studies involved David Johnson, a professor of social psychology at the University of Minnesota. He and his colleagues reviewed all the studies they could find on the subject from 1924 to 1980. The vast majority of the studies found that children learn better when they work cooperatively as opposed to competitively, while only a few found no significant difference. The more complex the learning task, however, the worse children in a competitive environment fared. A 1983 study of 310 laboratory technicians by Dean Josvold here at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver and his colleagues found that subordinates who worked for a competitive leader were largely dissatisfied with their jobs. The motivated employees were those whose bosses were cooperatively inclined. That finding nicely complements with this professor's other research, who has shown repeatedly that cooperation in the workplace translates into much better decision-making and higher productivity. So, why would this be? Why does competition translate into a more destructive environment for which to be creative and efficient at whatever the task might be? Firstly, competition makes us anxious, which interferes with concentration. Second, the ability to share talent and resources as would be possible in a cooperative strategy disallows us to learn from one another. And third, maybe most importantly, trying to win distracts us from the task at hand. We're forced to focus on beating others rather than to work together to maximize performance and achieve excellence. It is psychologically destructive in the sense that we are forced to see others as obstacles to our success. It leads to dishonesty, as the goal, of course, becomes to destroy others by whatever means possible, as is what the market system has become. This makes sense, obviously, as it's irrational to trust someone who gains from your failure. Recognizing this, people shift their stance to something like, well, then we just shouldn't overdo competition. We should pursue it to a healthy amount. Unfortunately, this line of reasoning is also flawed. The problem with competition is not the amount to which we pursue it or to what avenue we apply such strategies. The problem lies with competition itself. A social poison is a social poison no matter the quantity. The phrase healthy competition, then, is really actually just a contradiction in terms. So, enough about the destructive effects intrinsic to competition. Many people claim that competition is enjoyable and as such is enough to warrant this sort of recreational activity. Firstly, the problem with such a claim is that it's not compared to anything. Another problem is that people are hardly exposed to cooperative sports or other cooperative games in a robustly competitive culture, so they can't accurately judge competitive games against anything else. Dozens of studies have been carried out to determine whether competitive games are more enjoyable to cooperative games, assuming people are exposed to both. Overwhelmingly, in fact, most boys and essentially all girls, once exposed to cooperative games, prefer them over competitive games. A good exercise I've found is to simply think of cooperative games we were raised to play as children and see if we can even think of any. The fact that most of us cannot should show how deeply indoctrinated we are as a culture to this mindset. Competition is, of course, profoundly destructive in our economic system from just about every angle imaginable. This is essentially the context in which the Zeitgeist Movement has discussed its detriments, from the planned and intrinsic obsolescence and thus waste that is produced due to the need to create a multiplicity of products to compete for market share, to the artificial scarcity, to the ever-widening income gap, and the list goes on and on. It is, of course, claimed that competition is an incentive mechanism to get people to perform their best. As I mentioned briefly already, studies repeatedly reveal that people generally do an inferior job when working in a competitive culture or competitive structure. And if we step outside our current economic and political system and frame things from within a resource-based economy, this would resemble a truly cooperative framework. If scientists got together to share knowledge and information to build the best computer possible, then it would just be done, without the need for corporations to each hire a group of scientists to compete with each other, hoarding patents and unable to share ideas. Again, I'll go more into the science of motivation soon. The implications of this understanding is that our schools, our workplaces, and in fact our entire economic system are predicated on a motivational structure that is backward. And it, of course, walks in tandem with the monetary system structure. Back to competition, the research clearly suggests over and over that competition is a social cancer, always, not just a lot of the time or most of the time. And it's simply another reason we must remove the monetary market structure for the social well-being of everyone. Going back to the issue of sustainable values, valuing competition as anything other than a wholly destructive force within society would seem an unsustainable value to hold then, as all the research clearly demonstrates. In sports or any type of competitive game, we're well aware of how badly it feels when you lose, but few pause to reflect on the psychological ramifications of winning. You feel a strong high, you gloat for a while, and then you come down. In fact, you crash down and you need more of it, precisely like building up a tolerance to a drug. And even sitting on the sidelines, we're envious of the winners and feel contempt towards the losers, and we're suspicious of everyone. The emotional needs that we attempt to meet through competition are actually exasperated by competition. They make us more dependent. They make our self-esteem more contingent on competition. Bringing this back to the topic of human nature, to show that any quality is part of a fixed human nature would entail demonstrating that that particular quality is exhibited to the same degree in all environmental circumstances, which holds no ground for competition, and as far as I know, has not been done for any specific human behavior, really. Quite possibly as powerful a belief that pervades the globe as human nature beliefs is the belief in free will, which is simply defined as the ability to make decisions free from constraints, suggesting that there is somehow an independence of the brain that is unrelated to everything around us that affects it. Now, I'm aware that this is an extremely contentious subject, as the existence or absence of free will calls into question a myriad of other beliefs and traditions that many people cling to, spanning across religious, political, and legal institutions and the entire monetary system itself. So let's delve into it. What do we know? Well, we don't usually attribute other natural phenomena, like storms, tectonic plate movement, growth of trees, or the ocean's tidal movements, to free will, no matter their unpredictability, since we understand that they are the result of a chain of causes and effects strictly obeying the laws of physics. So if our desires and choices are likewise the result of natural law, then the notion of free will is to be discredited. If our minds are merely brains containing electrochemical signals, as they certainly appear to be to neuroscientists, then we have no free will. Why do we assume that our brains are exempt from these natural laws? It is likely because we are uncomfortable about not really being in control of our decisions, that we're really just biochemical social machines. There's a fascinating BBC documentary called The Secret You. The ending scene shows a fascinating experiment designed to demonstrate exactly this, that what seem like decisions or free choices to us are really governed by neuronal processes that we're not consciously aware of. Professor Marcus de Sautoy, who conducts the sequence of events in the episode, is on a quest to find the true source of our decisions. He's told to randomly decide to press either a left or a right button. At the same time, his brain is hooked up to a scanner system to record the brain activity that led up to the decision of to making the decision of to press either button, and the computer records when the button was pressed. The results were quite astonishing to the professor. They could determine up to 6 seconds in advance of the decision he was going to make each time, simply by scanning the pattern of neuronal activity in his brain. So this implies that our conscious decisions are secondary things to our actual brain activity. Truly fascinating, and this experiment has been performed dozens and dozens of times, and the results are always the same. To reiterate, the experiment reveals that there's a deterministic mechanism that leads up to your decision at a later point that's inevitable. It can only go that way. Much of the time, we make the mistake about attributing certain behavior to free will simply because we're ignorant about the source of behavior. The more we understand about the sources of behavior, including plant and animal tropisms, the less we tend to attribute behavior to free will or instinct, which is another, as I mentioned, nothing word that really gives no information about the source of the behavior. Jacques Loeb's work, as I mentioned, is wonderful to look at for this issue, specifically his book, The Mechanistic Conception of Life, which still holds much value even after all these years. All of Loeb's work with the word instinct was eventually thrown out, and he said there are certain patterns of behavior we haven't yet been able to decipher. Let's hunt them out. Let's try to find the mechanism that generates the behavior. Free will is akin to the God of the gaps type argument. You can't just squeeze free will into the gaps, into whatever gaps we have in our understanding because you want it there. In short, your brain's decision-making circuitry in your frontal lobes controls your choices. When you choose between a papaya or a banana, patterns of neuronal activity representing these two possibilities appear in your prefrontal cortex. Copies of each pattern grow and spread at different rates depending on your past experiences and sensory impressions. Eventually, the number of copies of one pattern passes a threshold, and you pick either the papaya or the banana, or buy the Honda or Toyota, or travel to Paris or Barcelona. I've been going through another book called The Myth of Free Will, compiled by Chris Evatt, which is a compilation book of about 50 academics across many fields of science giving their take on the issue. A great point made throughout the book is that people seem to intellectually reject the idea of free will, yet they live their lives as if it exists, meaning that while we logically understand it's an unscientific idea, we haven't yet been able to incorporate this value into our value system. Which brings me back once again to the idea of sustainable values. If we were to really understand and embrace the reality of the myth of free will, there would be immense implications for society, not only in how we perceive ourselves and our fellow human beings, but in the very structure of society itself, which again would suggest that the absolute need for radical reform to a resource-based economy. So the implications would be as follows. We can no longer blame people or get justifiably angry at people, since they are just a product of all the environmental forces they've been exposed to combined with their biology. We must entirely reform how we treat aberrant behavior. Aside from the powerful case for the need of reform of the prison system by people like Dr. James Gilligan, the legal and prison systems operate with the assumption that criminals are individually responsible for their actions and that it is the person that must be punished, rather than the environment that created them that must be radically altered. And most importantly, this understanding invalidates many premises amongst which, or upon which the monetary market system is based, such as that people who work harder deserve more fruits for their supposed contribution to society, ignoring, of course, the irrelevancy of most jobs. People's efforts can only be as good as their environments permit them to act, so why would we reward something that they cannot help? Some people get more, and some people get less, not because of any worthiness or deserving quality, but because people had unequal environments that granted some people with the ability to succeed in the market system and others without it. It's as simple as that. And this leads me to the next topic, of which is an implication of the prior two myths being understood, our beliefs about what motivates human beings. This needs to be wholly reevaluated if our values are to be sustainable and consistent with what science has demonstrated to us. One of the most common reactions by those new to the resource-based economy concept is to assert that without the monetary system, people will lack the necessary incentive that drives people to persevere in our current socioeconomic model. I want to examine the relevant evidence about what truly motivates human beings. Do this, and you'll get that. These 6 words summarize our society's doctrine for raising children, teaching students, and managing workers. The monetary system has engraved this idea into society so deeply that an inordinate portion of the population believes that the monetary incentive is an effective mechanism. Many claim that if there's no money, humans will just lie around and be lazy. This is just sad. First of all, the most powerful contributions to society came from those who were truly interested in social progress, not detached monetary gain, such as Einstein, Galileo, Newton, the Wright brothers, and Tesla. As stated by sociologist Phillips later, the idea that everyone wants money is propaganda circulated by wealth addicts to make themselves feel better about their addiction. In the mid-1990s, a Gallup poll was conducted which found that over 50% of American adults volunteered time for social causes, at an average of about 4.2 hours per week for 20.5 billion hours per year. So even with the crippling effect of the monetary system, human beings still strive to help one another. The logical deduction from this finding is that a social system that inherently supports and reinforces acts of reciprocation would drastically increase these statistics. In a resource-based economy, everyone is raised to his or her highest potential in order to become a contributor, greatly enhancing our social evolution and raising everyone's standard of living, thus changing the incentive mechanism. Such an environment would allow intrinsic motivation, liking what you do, to flourish. The use of rewards, whether it is money, grades, excessive praise, or other bribes to control people's behavior, is a practice that is widely accepted and exercised, but rarely challenged. Extrinsic motivators, controlling sources that come from outside the individual, are the preferred way to manipulate people in the classroom, at home when raising children, in the workplace, and in society at large as the dominant work ethic. Similar to the use of punishment and threat, which I'll discuss after, to elicit mindless obedience, offering rewards may provoke temporary compliance. However, the long-term effectiveness of extrinsic motivation does not hold up under close scrutiny. To better understand the effectiveness or lack thereof of rewards, we must first pose a few preliminary questions. First, for whom or what are rewards effective? It is easy to see the attractiveness of rewards and punishment, as it requires very little effort for the person, group, or institution seeking a particular behavior. Such a disposition ignores the understanding that the environment that affects the motivation. It opts for an approach that precludes working with people, while instead focuses on doing things to people. And second, for how long are rewards effective? For what are rewards effective? As sociologist Alfie Kohn explains in another article entitled The Risk of Rewards, studies over many years have found that behavior modification programs are rarely successful at producing lasting changes in attitudes or behavior. When the rewards stop, people usually return to the way they acted before the program began. He further elaborates, indeed, extrinsic motivators do not alter the emotional or cognitive commitments that underlie behavior, at least not in a desirable direction. a child promised a treat for learning or acting responsibly has been given every reason to stop doing so, since there is no longer a reward to be gained. It is simple to understand why. Rewarding shifts people's focus from the behavior to the reward itself. It is result-oriented rather than process-oriented, a recipe that ensures disinterest, lower creativity, and suboptimal efficiency. So, do rewards motivate people? Certainly, they motivate people to obtain the reward. However, this extrinsic motivation usually comes at the price of deteriorating interest and excellence at whatever is being done. Here are a few more central reasons why rewards ultimately fail, and then I'll wrap up. The first is that rewards punish. The underlying assumptions about conventional parenting, teaching, and workplace management are that there are two dispositions: positive reinforcement via rewards and punitive responses. However, the research clearly demonstrates that rewards and punishments are not opposites. As Cohn denotes, there are two sides of the same coin, and it is a coin that does not buy very much. 2. Rewards destroy relationships. Rewards connote by their very definition the disruption of cooperative learning, and they are most destructive when made artificially scarce. When only a few children in a class are awarded gold stars, everyone's turned into a competitor, an obstacle to others' success. The same logic can be applied to classes where students are graded on a bell curve. Similarly, when collective rewards are offered, a person or group is much more likely to be blamed as the person responsible for the failure to obtain that reward in question, thus rupturing relationships. Distrust and stress tend to flourish in such a system. And 3, rewards ignore reasons. A child is misbehaving, workers performing poor quality work, a student is unmotivated to learn. These are many of the situations in which we're inclined to offer rewards in order to attempt to correct what is going wrong. The problem is that the rewards do nothing to actually address the true underlying causes about why the trouble has occurred in the first place. It is simple to recognize why this approach is used, though. It requires little effort on behalf of the intervener. And the exact same line of reasoning, in fact, can be applied to punishment. The implications of all this research is, again, that our schools, our workplaces, and in fact our entire economic system are predicated on a motivational structure that is backward. It is a structure that is ineffective at best and socially crippling at worst. And it is a structure that cannot disconnect from the monetary system. Instead, it necessitates the monetary incentives removal, and is simply another reason for why the monetary system must be removed holistically. To rely on outdated, scientifically untenable methods for motivating people can only produce deleterious results in the long run, and as such is again an unsustainable value. To wrap up, I have a few concluding points I'd like to make that encapsulates this talk's purpose. The first being that upholding the status quo's prescribed values while complaining about the status quo is entirely hypocritical. Like Gandhi said, we must be the change we want to see. We can't just casually allude to it verbally while our actions contradict. This involves promoting and fulfilling a new value system, which brings me to my second final point. Advocating a new system while clinging to the establishment's institutions is hypocritical and frustrates the needed changes. So likewise, it is contradictory to advocate for a resource-based economy while at the same time giving credence to the institutions which are products of the monetary system. This includes political, legal, financial, and religious institutions. And the final point, what is needed? Complete disengagement and rejection of our social system, its associated institutions, and the values foisted therein. The only way the present social system will be evolved out of is through our refusal to participate in it, while both exposing its countless social distortions and by trumpeting an entirely new value system. This is the goal of the Zeitgeist Movement, to bring these socially positive values into the public's eyes in an attempt to reach a critical mass that can transform this collective awareness into a new social system. Thank you very much.
I hope you all enjoyed that, guys. I think it contains some really relevant and insightful information, both that we could use in either conversation or future presentations. So I hope that helps. On with the next part of the show, which is a presentation that I've been wanting to give for a while, entitled Releasing Human Potential, Creating a Passion-Led Learning Environment. The idea of the educational model in a resource-based economy is to engineer an interesting learning environment based on intrigue and interconnection between different subjects, and one that's also based on a student of whatever age following their passion. It's when we follow our passion and when we strive to be creative and solve problems that we as humans truly excel. A resource-based economy explicitly in its design heralds education as a central part of the design of a resource-based economy, recognizing that it is a train of thought that creates the sort of world that we want to see. So one of the basic premises of a resource-based economy is the replacement of monotonous labor with more efficient practices such as automation, robotics, and AI. The recognition must be that one person's suffering is a pollutant to the entire social organism, and the immune system must seek the root cause of that pollutant and address it there. One of the fundamental solutions to human suffering in the development of modern human society is shortcuts. In other words, the development of technology that takes over monotonous and boring labor, as well as providing more accuracy in terms of everything from health care to food production, etc. This is not reflected in our cultural assumptions, such as you shall earn your living by the sweat of your brow and time is money, because we've never been at the technological stage to relieve these labor-intensive tasks, but we are now. It is these cultural means that are holding us back from relieving one of the greatest inhibitors to our collective social progress, and that is the relief of doing monotonous labor for what is essentially living tokens. Not to mention the fact that the strategic and humane application of the scientific method towards our technological capabilities and the integration of them into our social system could lead to something never before seen on this planet, which is an access abundance to goods and resources that meet the needs of every human being on planet Earth, doing away with one of the major causes of most of the problems in our world, scarcity. Technology is supposed to be there to serve us. That is why it came about in the first place. It did not come about to increase profits. Even if this value system were not to your liking, it is coming whether you like it or not through technological unemployment. See Federico Pistono's lecture from Z-Day 2012 on this, as he goes through it very well, and his subsequent book, Robots Will Steal Your Job, But It's Okay, How to Survive the Economic Collapse and Be Happy. If it's anything like his presentation on Z-Day, I'm sure it'll be a great read. However, if you don't get time to check this out, then don't worry, because I plan on including it on a future show, as once again, I think it's really important information. So the obvious transition that we are making now to mechanization, coupled with the philosophy of freeing mankind from these tasks, leaves education in a completely different realm, one of promoting creativity and autonomy rather than rote learning and the ability to follow orders via coercion. With the freeing of laborious, labor-intensive tasks, humans will be left to explore personal and social endeavors as long as we nurture these values, something that cannot be done effectively in a monetary system because of the need to prepare people to find their slot in the marketplace. Essentially, people will be free to be able to find their element and pursue it. There is a lot of obstacles in our way towards creating this sort of passion-led learning environment. One of them being our language. There's a few words that we use educationally that we don't really understand the meaning of. The first one would be intelligence. This idea of people excelling when they find their passion and pursue it is well laid out by Ken Robinson in his book The Element. It's subheading, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything. The problem is, as I've stated before, that school is a cookie-cutting plant for the marketplace, and in being so has underlined a particular view of intelligence due to the need to grade, test, and pigeonhole people into a streamlined job market. This point is well made by Ken Robinson in the book in question. Quote, "The common sense view goes something like this. We are all born with a fixed amount of intelligence. It's a trait like blue or green eyes or long or short limbs. Intelligence shows itself in certain types of activity, especially in math and our use of words. It's possible to measure how much intelligence we have through pencil and paper tests and to express this as a numerical grade. That's it. Put as bluntly as this, I trust this definition of intelligence sounds as questionable as it is, but essentially this definition runs through much of Western culture and a good bit of Eastern culture as well. It is the heart of our education systems and underpins a good deal of the multi-billion-dollar testing industries that feed off public education throughout the world. It's at the heart of the idea of academic ability, dominates college entrance examinations, underpins the hierarchy of subjects in education, and stands as the foundation of the whole idea of IQ. Ironically, Alfred Binet, one of the creators of the IQ test, intended the test to serve precisely the opposite function. In fact, he originally designed it, on commission from the French government, exclusively to identify children with special needs so they could get appropriate forms of schooling. He never intended it to identify degrees of intelligence or mental worth. In fact, Binet noted that the scale he created does not permit the measure of intelligence because intellectual qualities are not superposable, and therefore they cannot be measured as linear surfaces are measured. Nor did he ever intend it to suggest that a person could not become more intelligent over time. Some recent thinkers, he said, have affirmed that an individual's intelligence is a fixed quantity, a quantity that cannot be increased. We must protest and react against this brutal pessimism, or we must try to demonstrate that this is founded on nothing. Close quote. But moving away from IQ to talk a little bit more about intelligence, for the definition of the word is a problematic area in semantics. It's devoid of physical referent, and so its meaning can easily be misconstrued by those using it if their definition is different. I had a moment recently with a student who used it to say, well, it's just not very intelligent of that person to do that. And I said, okay, define intelligence. And after a little moment of silence and his friends sitting there looking at him waiting for his definition, he sort of cracked up laughing, and he said, I can't do it, because he could see all the cul-de-sacs that he'd walk into, and he sort of said, I can't do it. And I said, but yet you were perfectly happy to use that word in describing someone else's ability or lack of ability in a certain area. Do you see how that can cause problems? And he said, yeah. And then we sat there and I talked about defining freedom and defining hate and defining love and other sorts of words. And we got to just before he was about to go to English, actually, which was quite ironic. We got to the sort of idea that a large amount of our language is hugely out of date and open to serious misunderstanding, and that basically dictionary definitions don't quite do it. We have a different idea of what words mean to each of us, and it makes meaningful communication extremely difficult. And I got that idea across before him and his friends walked out the door, basically thinking that most of what they've been saying their whole life is complete bullshit. It's nice to plant these seeds, isn't it? Anyway, so we can see where this might cause problems, basically, and how culture has superimposed its dominant values onto the word itself. The best definition I've found for the word, however, is from Jacques Fresco, which is the ability to extract the significance from most situations, I would add, in a given environment. You know, sports people might use their intelligence on a football field to extract the significance from a given situation that's unfolding in play, just like a scientist may extract significance from a particular result from an experiment. This would extend to a teacher's ability to make something significant as well, or in other words, interesting, to recognize the significance in someone's abilities and encourage that so that person may reach their fullest potential. This doesn't mean spoon-feeding information, quite the opposite actually. Good teaching is about empowerment, so the student develops autonomy and resilience in the dedication to the task of extracting that significance, i.e. intelligence. I sum this up quite nicely in the first drum lesson I ever give to people by saying, hello, welcome to your drum lesson. Few things I want to get out of the way. First thing, I'm not here to teach you the drums. I'm here to teach you to teach yourself the drums. So basically planting that seed of autonomy straight from the start and outlining the idea that I'm going to give you the tools to do the job. but you're going to have to stand on your own 2 feet and work this stuff out by yourself, basically. And then from there on, we do generally what my students are happy doing and what they say will get them on the drum kit practicing. Why would I want to make them do something that isn't what they want to do at that particular stage? There are certain things you have to sort of subtly chuck in there to make sure that they actually have their basic technique right, and they're covering some of the basics early on, and you can sort of put that in there in intelligent ways by giving a demonstration or just subtly working it into the material somehow. But why shouldn't it be the student's choice what they want to learn? They're not going to learn it very well if they don't want to learn it. And of course there's something to be said for sticking to something, when it gets hard, but there's also a hell of a lot to be said for working around the problem and finding a shortcut. This is again another thing I often say to my students. What are you often told in school? Are you told to work hard or think hard first? And they usually always say work hard because that's what's, promoted in the schools. I'm like, oh, so these people say you should work hard, yeah? Right, okay, cool. Well then, they're going to need to not drive in their cars the 3-mile journey that gets them to school. Then they should be getting up an hour or so earlier and walking to school, shouldn't they? If they believe in hard work, get rid of the car. Whilst we're at it, you could be doing your washing on a granny board, so get rid of your washing machine. And, you could hang up your clothes and run back when it rains and all that sort of stuff, so you don't really need a tumble dryer either. And let's face it, you could wash up your dishes in the sink rather than use the dishwasher, and so on and so forth. All of these things are shortcuts that make the boring shit in life easier so that we don't have to do it anymore. What the hell is wrong with that? By the way, I realise that the example involving the granny board features a pre-existing technology. So just imagine how crap things were before they came along. Must have been really, really smelly people out there. Anyway, back to intelligence, which cannot be measured by simply IQ alone. That measures a particular line of intelligence. The real question should be, how are you intelligent? Basically, a wide variation in interests that relate to our collective survival and prosperity within our environment will be the value set that must be reinforced in an RVE, because that is what is significant to all of us. It's what we all share. We share this planet. We share a biosphere. It would be intelligent of us and actually evolutionarily more fit if we adapted to that reality in the most intelligent way, using our technology and our collective abilities to react. This is not something that can take place in a price system, because one must submit to whatever labour is available in order to make ends meet. This limits a human's creative potential, just as the price system limits true efficiency. This same restriction exists to human thought. Only the presupposed cultural doctrine is what is ever possible, even though history shows us time and time again that these presuppositions or truths are constantly being proven wrong. Within this framework, people assume, because of how their education system is structured in their society, that people would just sit around on their ass all day, eating potato chips and turn into fat, lazy blobs. But this is a cultural assumption born out of an arse-about-face education system that rewards conformity to the social status quo and the memorization of most likely meaningless facts in exchange for rewards. So, of course, as soon as you've finished getting the grade for the particular task in question, you can just happily give up and forget all of what you just learnt, because now it's irrelevant. Just like when the bell rings, any task you're doing isn't really worth finishing, so move along to the next workstation, please. Thank you very much. And, of course, laziness is reinforced by our culture, something that I'm going to go into when I get back to reading Just Garcher's book, The First Civilization, but also something you can check out if you read the book Drive by Daniel Pink. Because if you've been at a job all day that you absolutely hate, all you want to do is sit down and rest your mind and make yourself go numb from the horrible shit you had to engage in all day long. It's not really surprising, is it? So we can see that we would turn this on its head in the resource-based economy, and questioning a illegitimate authority or a particular line of reasoning as being wrong would be celebrated in the pursuit of truth, because we'd recognize that we are in an emergent state of discovery about the natural world and its functions. And we always have been. It's just that we've been trying to deny it to preserve our own particular belief systems. So not accepting anything as the final frontier would be a very important value set to promote in the education system in a resource-based economy. Not something, again, that can happen in our system. For instance, if you told Barack Obama that democracy was not the final frontier, or the Pope that Catholicism was not the be-all and end-all, then my prediction is they probably wouldn't agree. Even though both rest on nothing but a belief system and have to be upheld with laws and words and opinions, self-preservation will not even allow them to consider another option. This is a byproduct of groupthink, the self-appointed guardians of the status quo, as they've been noted before. Human beings need to fit in to the survival of the group or the surrounding tribe, if you will, and this is shown to be extremely powerful in some experiments that have been carried out in the past, some of these being the Stanley Milgram experiment and the Solomon Asch experiment, both of which are well worth checking out. And I'm sure you're familiar with them, so I won't go through them now. This can be seen as a negative thing, these experiments, but there's also research to suggest that when 10% of a population, or perhaps even less, get an idea that they want to run with passionately, the rest will follow, especially if the current system is failing them, which ours quite evidently is. That's good news because it shows the power of critical mass, and hence the reason why the Zeitgeist Movement is here and is a viable engine for social change by developing a train of thought towards a more sensible, physically referented, emergent, objective decision-making process for a species that, after all, does share one holistic, interacting biosphere. Aka the idea of drawing significance and being more intelligent. The other positive of these social experiments is that through educating people about these experiments, they'll then be more likely to be conscious of the fact that they are susceptible to this, and less likely to go along with the crowd, and more likely to resist it and think about their behaviour in its own right rather than just blindly following. And making people aware of such things as this is what will lead to the critical thinking needed for a resource-based economy to work. Not to mention the lack of coercionary tactics and manipulation and artificial boundaries that separate people, such as money. This is one of the reasons why a resource-based economy could only properly function without money, because money creates a pyramid hierarchical structure by its very presence. You have more money, you have more say. You can't have a population collaborate effectively and still have a system in which you have to seek dominance over someone else to survive. It's simply not possible. This is why it's so important to remove all artificial boundaries that separate people so that they can collaborate effectively. One of the hallmarks of the coercionary tactics we see out there in our culture today is that it actually creates quite a large amount of groupthink, which works against one of the other words that education likes to champion, as well as the media and our culture in general, which is individuality. But the fact of the matter is that we don't really live up to this. First of all, I do like the statement by Jacques Fresco when saying, how much of you is you? It's a looped question. You're an interaction between your genes, your environment, your reinforcement. You know what? Just because you've come to this train of thought, it doesn't mean that you're not still that. I still find myself blowing my top at my kids when, in actual fact, they're maybe not doing anything particularly wrong. It's just that I don't like it, and I don't have a more effective method to be able to change their behaviour. Because I know, for one thing, I've shouted in the past about certain issues, and that doesn't change anything in their behaviour. It just makes them feel like they're being shouted at. I'm just trying to put it out there that we all have weaknesses still based in how we've been reinforced. It's just that we understand that there's a better way that we could be, a better way that other people could be, and that we're flawed and that we could be doing a lot better. But coming back to my point about individuality, if you take something, for instance, like patriotism, which has been rampant in the UK this year with the Queen's Jubilee celebrations and the Olympics, that doesn't look like individuality to me. That looks like a bunch of people waving a flag that some monkey stuck in the mud many, many years ago so that he could claim the rights to have more property than the other monkeys in the area. But it wasn't enough to just do that. He made a nice little pretty picture on a flag and then said to everybody, not only do you have to be my slaves, but you also need to love me for it, which is, of course, the absolute essence of sadomasochism, isn't it? You know, fear me, but love me at the same time. To me, examples like this serve as evidence to a lack of individuality in our current system. In a resource-based economy, you've been given the platform to be able to do what truly makes you happy in life, to follow your passions, because you've been given a platform in which to do so. And you would be encouraged to do so. I would see this as the highest form of individuality myself. Creativity is another word that is massively misconstrued, again, in our education system and by our culture. It's another word chased around by cultural myths. The best definition I've heard for this word is the process of having unique ideas which we or others find value in. Imagination is something rather different, as we can imagine all sorts of things, but we must be creative for such things to manifest. When we tell kids to stop having their head in the clouds, we limit the first step in creativity, and when we reinforce our definition of the world through our cultural restrictions, we do further damage still. For instance, if someone produces something, the intention should be to find the place it can be improved no matter what, rather than just saying it sucks, which doesn't give any relevant feedback towards the improvement of the task. If we are made to feel that we lack in a certain area, we are less likely to do it. In fact, this nearly happened with regards to my musical creativity beyond the drums, because the first band I was in when I was younger used to sort of just belittle me every time I tried to sort of poke my nose into anything outside of the realms of bashing skins with sticks. And I sort of thought, well, yeah, maybe my suggestions are crap. And then as I got older and I got into another band and started making the suggestions in a much more open environment, they got taken on and we wrote songs around them. Lots of people seemed to like them, and we started shifting a few CDs and things. It was kind of like, maybe I'm actually all right at this. Actually, also worth noting that a lot of that new creativity was spawned by the fact that I was able to get on a computer and create music with any instrument that I ever want right at my fingertips. So that freedom that technology gave me allowed me to give myself the confidence to know that I can write music outside of the drums actually, and actually I'm pretty good at it. So it just goes to show what the combination of a healthy environment plus the right tools can actually do to help shape human beings in a much more positive direction. We often talk about creativity like it's an inborn gift, but you wouldn't catch people saying the same thing with regards to reading. If you couldn't read at 16 or 17 years old, people would say, that's terrible, why did no one teach you? If you're not creative at 16 or 17 years old, that's okay. You just weren't born with that natural creative ability. But that's actually not true. Creativity is actually no different. We all have the capacity to be creative in different directions. Science is massively misunderstood in this way as being cold and not very creative. But as I often say to my students, if you have strategically investigated all of the potential possibilities that you can do in a particular subject area of drumming, you already have the chance of being able to create a far more entertaining piece because you've just got more options available to you. Someone who's not willing to look at those things and just allows the inspiration to come to them in a moment of genius falls short, because his inspiration is based on whatever is available to him there. And if he's not open to all of the options, then naturally he's not open to all of the possibilities. That doesn't sound like someone who's maximizing their creativity to me. Another example of this is one of my drum students who's a 45-year-old landscape gardener who came for drum lessons, and one day he said, you know what, I've always wanted to write my own songs. I know you've got a little studio up there, James. Would you be able to help me write my own songs? I said, yeah, sure. So he came in, and honestly, this guy's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. His lyrics are fantastic. They're very, very good. Very well written. Better than mine, which is kind of annoying considering I've been doing it for years. And it just goes to show you the massive amount of untapped human potential that exists out there. It is this process of imagination, creation and feedback that is the bedrock of the most rewarding and stimulating form of motivation to do a task to the best of your ability, intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is the pursuit of a task for the sake of the task alone and the engagement in it. This comes from being in a state of flow, the ability to get lost in the task at hand and lose all sense of self whilst in it, creating a flow of energy between the participant to the task and back again. Something that is again restricted when you have to think of making ends meet, which of course leads directly towards extrinsic motivation, which is just the thing you need if you want to reward people for doing laborious labour, which an RBE would look to eradicate wherever possible for the reasons stated earlier. This flow is far easier in an environment of people who share the same interests as you, of course. Being in a group of people who feel the same way as you about something will reinforce what you are doing and make you feel like you belong, which is something all human beings crave. As the physicist John Wheeler once said, nobody can be anybody without someone else being around. There are times to be alone, and there are times when you need to kick things around with others who share your interests and are extensional to you. In fact, the Internet's a great example of this, in action with people across many walks of life, finding common ground with those around the world, and in turn changing our global culture and understanding in a way never before possible. Which is exactly the reason I'm here talking to you today. If it were not for the Internet, I'm sure I'd just be blaming the work shy and the latest government for all society's ills, but alas, through extending the cultural memes, so to speak, I am now involved in the starts of something amazing, with a great bunch of like-minded individuals, as well as a whole extended network of social and environmental groups who are recognizing the train of thought in their own unique ways. Thank you, Internet. Another hang-up we have out there is one to do with age. Apparently when you get to certain ages, there's certain things you shouldn't do. It's a bit strange, really, when you think about it. Considering we're in a constant state of emergence as human beings, you'd think that we probably know more than we knew before and that we slowly improve. But apparently at certain ages, there's just some things that you just got to stop doing, and then you've got to get married and get kids and settle down and get a little mortgage, save for your retirement, and then die. So it's all fully prescribed out there, I would say. The cultural expectation, that is. Hopefully in a more emergent culture, one based on personal and learning development, will see these sorts of social contrivances as simply ridiculous. Age is a state of mind. A point well made by Joe Rogan in the following clip.
I'm all in favor of believing that there's a purpose to life, but I just wanted to make a little sense. That's all. And here's the craziest thing about life. This is the thing that nobody really considers. You know as much about what life is all about as anybody who's ever lived ever. That's the craziest fucking thing about us. We're all just kind of wandering through this, going, do you know what you're doing? Yes. Oh, I do too. I know what I'm doing. Okay, good then. But really, no one has a fucking clue. But we never bring it up. You remember when you were a kid and you thought they were real grown-ups? You remember that shit? You remember? You know what I'm talking about, motherfucker. Older people love to pretend they know what the fuck is going on. We're all full of shit. When I was a kid, I thought they were grown-ups. Didn't you? Like you were crying, you got sent to your room, like, you know what? One day I'm going to be a grown-up and everything's going to make sense. Then one day you're like 25 at the supermarket and the bag boys calls you sir and you're like, what the fuck? How'd that happen? Shit! You mean I'm a grown-up? Oh my God, are we fucked? You mean nobody knows? We're all just zombies walking through this life? Shit!
Yes, point well made there, Mr. Rogan. Remember that human beings have spent the vast majority of their existence living in small communities and tribes, and they're not really supposed to be individualistic, self-serving islands, if you will, in the way that our current market model supports through the mentality of needing to make a profit to survive. Profit literally implies the denying of something from someone else so that you can gain more. How on earth was that idea ever going to manifest a peaceful or sustainable planet? Like collaboration through competition? Well, quite clearly it wasn't. And of course, our children are really separated from the older age ranges and living in the wider social community for large amounts of their day by staying in age-segregated classes at school. But it doesn't need to be that way. There are ways around that particular issue, even in the society we currently live in. This point is well made in the story of the state of Oklahoma, who had a particular educational program for children in the area. And I'm going to read this out from the book because I think it heralds a fantastic educational idea and one that we should definitely be promoting on the way into and during a resource-based economy. Quote, "The state of Oklahoma has a nationally acclaimed early years reading program, providing reading classes for 3 to 5-year-olds throughout the state. The Jenks district offers a unique version of the program. This came about when the owner of another institution in Jenks, one across the street from the elementary schools, approached the superintendent of the schools. He'd heard about the reading program and wondered if his institution could offer some help. The superintendent responded positively to the idea and, after clearing some bureaucratic hurdles, welcomed the other institution's help. The other institution is the Grace Living Center, a retirement home. Over the next few months, the district established a preschool and kindergarten classroom in the very heart of the Grace Living Center. Surrounded by clear glass walls with a gap at the top to allow the sounds of the children to filter out, the classroom sits in the foyer of the main building. The children and their teachers go to school there every day, as though it were another classroom. Because it's in the foyer, the residents walk past it at least 3 times a day to get their meals. As soon as the class is opened, many of the residents stopped to look through the glass walls at what was going on. The teachers told them that the children were learning to read. One by one, several residents asked if they could help. The teachers were glad to have the assistance, and they quickly set up a program called Book Buddies. The program pairs a member of the retirement home with one of the children. The adults listen to the children read, and they read to them as well. The program has had some remarkable results. One is that the majority of children at the Grace Living Center are outperforming other children in the district on the state's standardized reading tests. More than 70% are leaving the program at age 5, reading at the 3rd grade level or higher. But the children are learning much more than how to read. As they sit with their book buddies, the kids have rich conversations with the adults about a wide variety of subjects, and especially about the elders' memories of their childhoods growing up in Oklahoma. The children ask things about how big iPods were when the adults were growing up, and the adults explain that their lives really weren't like the lives the kids have now. This leads to stories about how they lived and played 70, 80 or 90 years ago. The children are getting a wonderfully textured social history of their hometowns from people who have seen the town evolve over the decades. Parents are also pleased with this extracurricular benefit that a lottery is now required because the demand for the 60 available desks is so strong. Something else has been going on at the Grace Living Center, though. Medication levels are plummeting. Many of the residents on the program have stopped or cut back on their drugs. Why is this happening? Because the adult participants in the program have come back to life. Instead of whiling away their days waiting for the inevitable, they have a reason to get up in the morning and a renewed excitement about what the day might bring. Because they are reconnecting with their creative energies, they are literally living longer. There's something else the children learn. Every now and then the teachers have to tell them that one of their book buddies won't be coming anymore, that this person has passed. So the children come to appreciate at a tender age of life that it has rhythms and cycles, and that even the people they become close to are part of that cycle. In a way, the Grace Living Centre has restored an ancient traditional relationship between the generations. The very young and the very old have always had an almost mystical connection. They seem to understand each other in a fundamental, often unspoken way, and our practice in the West is often to keep these generations apart. The Book Buddies program shows in a simple yet profound way the enrichment possible when generations come together. It shows, too, that the elderly can revive long-lost energies if the circumstances are right and the inspiration is there." Close quote. I'm sorry for reading all of that out, but I just think that's a beautiful story. And it's not something that you can necessarily put down as an A or an F on a grade paper. It's just the enrichment of human life and the understanding of connection and engagement and learning and creativity and imagination, which is something all human beings possess and all human beings will find their element in to some degree or another. For these are the sorts of connections that can be made to increase empathy and connections between age groups in your community, when getting grades and cramming all your education in so you can get to the marketplace is not an issue anymore. Evidence of this educational pressure and competition is showing signs of reaching truly unimaginable scales right now, such as this example, again given in the book The Element. Quote, "In cities like Los Angeles and New York, there is fierce competition for places in particular kindergarten schools. Children are being interviewed at the age of 3 to see if they are suitable material. I assume that the earnest selection panels are thumbing through the resumes of these toddlers, assessing their achievements to date. You mean this is it? You've been around for almost 36 months and this is all you've done? You seem to have spent the first 6 months doing nothing but lying around and gurgling." Close quote. Apologies, but I just find that hilarious. Is that where we want to be heading, people? Seriously, please stop what you are doing for a second, look at your child and ask if that's what you brought them to the world for, so that they could be competitive in the global marketplace. I think John Lennon put this very well when he was told by his mum, "John, the most important thing in life is to be happy." And so John went to school one day and they were all asked to draw a picture of what they wanted to be when they were older. And everybody's drawing pictures of firemen and policemen and yada, yada, yada. And John's drawing a big self-portrait of him with a great big grin on his face. And his teacher came over and said to John, "Oh, no, John, I don't think you've understood the assignment." John turned around to his teacher and said, "I don't think you've understood life." Here's another crazy notion of how to create a learning environment. Ever tried asking the kids? Why not ask the kids? It's a crazy idea, seeing as they're the ones who are actually learning it. Get them involved in the learning process. And perhaps they may come up with ideas like going out and finding rocks and dating them for geology, or making music using an idea they came up with in maths, or write a drama piece based around something they are learning in history, or write a song about a topic that they are learning about in geography. The list is endless when you start to join the dots between subjects and integrate them in interesting ways. And by doing this as well, especially with that sort of way of doing things, we start to plant the idea that no subject stands alone in its own right, which is, of course, implied at the moment by our system of shuffling students to different lessons via the ringing of bells, which is an operant conditioning technique that I went through in my Z-Day presentation in Vancouver. So basically a generalist point of view would open them up to finding a wide range of topics interesting when they realise how interconnected they are, and therefore a greater chance of finding their passion and in turn their element in many different fields as they grow and develop to be an adult. And onwards from there, as we stated earlier, learning is a lifelong pursuit. The freedom for someone to pursue their passion is not always an option. And even if it is, it's still restricted by a price system that demands labour for employment to meet your personal needs. This propensity will have to lead to a restriction in the amount of field trips a class could take and the other amount of hands-on learning exercises the students can perform, as stated earlier, for the need to reach the required standard set out by those in command. Other words that pervade our cultural landscape have a damaging effect too, like luck. You can't hear, taste, touch, smell, or see it, yet many people describe others as lucky. I personally think you make your own luck by carrying yourself in a certain way and driving for what you want in a passionate and single-minded manner. This was perhaps best put by a famous golfer. I don't actually remember his name, but he was interviewed after a very, very close-run match where I think he only just pulled things through on the 18th hole, and the interviewer said, "Oh, you were lucky on the 18th." He said, "Yeah, you know what? The more I practice, the luckier I get." It's funny that. Like I said, you create your own luck. If people realize that they are the architects of their own future and ask themselves what they would want and what sort of world they want to live in, this would be great progress to an RBE, rather than saying, well, you know, everybody else isn't going to do it, are they, mate? Well, I'm sorry, but all you're going to be left with at the end of this life is your own personal integrity and what you stood for whilst you were on the ride. If you can go to that place saying, well, I didn't do all those things because of what other people would have thought of me, then I'm going to postulate the idea that you're not going to be too happy about that. And I'm sure there are many other examples of words that are misinterpreted or misunderstood out there in our culture today, but that's just a little sample of some of the ones that certainly crop up now and then. Okay, I am going to close today's show with the last couple of pages of the book The Element, because I think it makes a very good point with regards to educational reform. I thank you all very much for listening to me today, and I'll speak to you soon. The Element has implications for teaching. Too many reform movements in education are designed to make education teacher-proof. The most successful systems in the world take the opposite view. They invest in teachers. The reason is that people succeed best when they have others who understand their talents, challenges, and abilities. This is why mentoring is such a helpful force in so many people's lives. Great teachers have always understood that their role is not to teach subjects, but to teach students. Mentoring and coaching is the vital pulse of a living system of education. The Element has implications for assessment. Education is being strangled persistently by the culture of standardized testing. The irony is that these tests are not raising standards, except in some very particular areas and at the expense of most of what really matters in education. To get a perspective on this, compare the process of quality assurance in education and those in an entirely different field, catering. In the restaurant business, there are two distinct models of quality assurance. The first is the fast food model. In this model, the quality of food is guaranteed because it's always standardized. The fast food chains specify exactly on what should be on the menu in all of their outlets. They specify what should be in their burgers or nuggets, the oil in which they should be fried, and the exact bun in which they should be served, how the fries should be made, what should be in the drinks, and exactly how they should be served. They specify how the room should be decorated and what the staff should wear. Everything is standardized. It's often dreadful and bad for you. Some forms of fast food are contributing to a massive explosion in obesity and diabetes across the world, but at least the quality is guaranteed. The other model of quality assurance in catering is the Michelin Guide. In this model, the guides establish specific criteria for excellence, but they do say how the particular restaurants should meet these criteria. They don't say what should be on the menu, what the staff should wear, or how the room should be decorated. All of that is at the discretion of the individual restaurant. The guides simply establish criteria, and it is up to every restaurant to meet them in whatever way they see best. They are then judged not on some impersonal standard, but by the assessment of experts who know what they are looking for and what a great restaurant actually is. The result is that every Michelin restaurant is terrific. They are all unique and different from each other. One of the essential problems for education is that most countries subject their schools to the fast food model of quality assurance, when they should be adopting the Michelin model instead. The future for education is not in standardizing, but in customizing, not in promoting groupthink, but in cultivating the real depth and dynamism of human abilities of every sort. For the future, education must be elemental. The examples I've just given point the way to the sorts of education we now need in the 21st century. A number of them build on principles that educational visionaries have been promoting for generations, principles often seen as eccentric and even heretical. And they were, then. The views of these visionaries were ahead of their times, hence my describing them as visionary. But the right time has arrived. If we are serious about educational transformation, we must understand the times and catch the new tide. We can ride it into the future or be overwhelmed and sink back into the past. The stakes could hardly be higher for education and for all who pass through it.